Good morning, Brandon. Thank you so much for once again being here and talking to us about a really important topic that is affecting our health, and that is mold toxicity, mold exposure. This is based off of a poll that I took on Instagram asking people what they wanted us to talk about next. And it was a three-way tie between mold toxicity, environmental toxins, and nutrition. And we thought that we would just go start at the top and go down the list. So today it is mold toxicity and mold exposure.
Awesome. Good. Yeah. Thank you for having me, Melody. Hi, it's good to see you, right? Yeah, I had a blast with that last talk, and hopefully your people enjoyed that, right? So your following enjoyed that. Yeah, and let's talk about mold. This is a great subject, but real quick, I was actually thinking, maybe your people are wondering this, maybe they're not, but I forgot to mention a quick little question about parasites that I get a lot, right? I forgot to mention it. Let's just throw it in if people are interested in this. But a lot of people are curious, hey, how do I test for parasites? Are there any good
Right.
functional medicine tests for parasites, right? And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the stool test, right, that I use with clients, unfortunately, they're not that great for pinpointing parasites, really, right? There's a couple companies that I use, GI Maps, Vibrant. At most they test for, I want to say 10 to 12, maybe 14 parasites. From my training, boy, my understanding is there's 150 to 200 different species of parasites, right, that we just can't test for. I
Right.
have heard of a gentleman out of Tacoma where he's up to, I think, 43, 44 different species, right? So, the testing isn't great. There are a few markers, however, on my comprehensive functional medicine blood work that I do with clients that are actually more accurate than that, right? And we talk
Okay.
about that in a different video someday, right? We
Mhm.
could actually go through your lab work, or I could bring somebody else's up. How going through some comprehensive blood work can actually be a lot more accurate than a stool test, right? And
Yeah,
then
I think that would be really
yeah,
interesting for
be really
people to
cool.
see maybe like how you detected parasites in me when we
Sure.
first did the testing almost 2 years ago.
You bet. Yeah.
So
Marry
yeah,
that with the symptoms in the presentation with
right.
clients, and that's the best way to go, really. There is a test that my mentor, Dr. Todd Watts, taught me, right? Back in the
Mhm.
back in 2017, I believe, he taught me this test, and I find this to be true. So what you do is you take two fingers, put it on your wrist right there, and if you feel a pulse, you have parasites, right? Haha. It sounds funny and silly, but I find it to be really true. I found most people do have a certain load of parasitic activity that we need to knock down a certain degree, more so with, some more so than others, right? But anyway, funny test. But yeah, so that's parasites. Let's go to
I
the next subject, right? Let's
I
talk about
enjoy
mold.
doing that with my family and friends too,
Yeah,
by the
yeah.
way. Like I get them all
Yeah.
fired up to take this test.
He
So
had me going. I was all serious, and he was too. And he just like deadpan face when he's saying it. And I was like, oh my goodness, too funny. But it sounds funny, but it really is true. Anyway, so
yeah,
um
yeah, it
let's
is.
let's
How
jump
could
in.
it not be? We're so
Right,
exposed.
so let's jump in and talk about mold, though. This is a
Okay.
huge
Yep.
subject.
It
Yeah,
is.
I'll let you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So what are some of the sources of mold? It's not just in our buildings. There are other sources that we need to consider as well. What
yeah, for
are,
sure. We'll talk
yeah.
about, boy, the living environment, buildings, and all environments. We'll talk about that, but let's talk about there's actually some food sources that can be a big, source of mold or mycotoxins, if you will, right? Big one is grains, right? Grains, corn, right? They can contain a lot of mold. Dried fruits, believe it or not, they can actually contain quite a few mycotoxins, mold. Coffee's a big one. Boy, make sure you're drinking mold-free coffee. If you know anything about natural medicine, functional medicine, biohacking, that's the, last few years has been a huge, buzz subject, if you will, is drinking mold-free coffee. Purity coffee, bulletproof. There's, Life Boost. It's becoming more and more popular, but just good old organic doesn't cut anymore. Make sure it's tested for mold as well, right? If you pee a bunch, have to urinate a bunch after drinking coffee. And if you feel kind of jittery and cranky and irritable, that's a sure sign you're getting hit with a lot of
And
mycotoxins, right?
so many people think, and I thought that that was caffeine
Yeah,
related. I
right,
didn't realize that that was actually mold related. So
for
that's
sure.
a
Yeah.
really good.
There is some crossover. Obviously, caffeine can do that to some people, but it's kind of a mixture of the both. Usually, it's the mycotoxins that make you just feel ugh. And if you have to urinate a bunch, that's a big, telltale sign, right? So that you do
Okay.
have
Yeah.
mycotoxins in your coffee. Wine and beer, right? So there's some sources, dietary sources of mycotoxins to try to avoid. But really a huge one is the living environment, right? And when I
Mm.
first started studying this back in 2016, 2017, more in depth, I was taught that, and I read that it was estimated 50% of all buildings in the US have some form of mold toxicity, right? Which is a huge number, right?
Right.
But more recently, the statistics are showing it's closer to 85% of all buildings actually have, a form of mycotoxin mold toxicity, right? So this is a huge issue
Mm.
that impacts a lot of people at their home, at their work, in their car. Believe it or not, I've had a couple clients where they
Yeah.
actually had a mold exposure in their car. They always talked about how their car had a weird mildew smell. The house was clear, but it was really their car, that was
Wow.
causing the issue, right? It's pretty wild, but
Well, and we
uh,
spend so much time in these enclosed spaces that
yeah,
there's no way that it wouldn't affect us really.
exactly. That's so true, right?
Yeah.
So huge
Yeah.
issue for sure.
So what are some of the symptoms that people are experiencing when
Yeah.
they have a mold toxicity load?
Yeah, great question. Great question. So mold can cause, boy, just a laundry list of symptoms, right? Some of the
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
biggest ones being brain fog, extreme or just regular fatigue, extreme fatigue. Everybody's going to present a little differently, right? Joint pain, joint pain all over. Achy, weird joints. It seems to be kind of systemic or throughout the body. Can be a sign of mold toxicity.
Mhm.
Chronic nosebleeds, can be a sign of mold toxicity in the body. uh Digestive issues, right? Like SIBO. I had a client where he had just SIBO galore. Finally we did some mold testing, and sure enough, through the roof, that was the main cause of his SIBO, right? Just it can affect digestion issues. It can cause panic attacks, right? I really do believe I didn't do testing, and I didn't know anything about this back in 2002. I was actually living in an apartment in the West Hills going to undergrad, and I had weird, just weird dark thoughts. I had panic attacks, right? So it can attack people in strange ways. Nightmares, panic attacks, dark thoughts can happen.
You
It can
mentioned
Yeah,
depression,
depression. It can affect the body
anxiety.
in many ways. If you notice that you're getting weird excessive static shocks when you're out in public or at home, that can be another sign of mold toxicity. Yeah, blurry vision. There's just so many things that can happen because of mold, right? And really, the most important thing is mold can actually decrease the immune system's ability to fight off things, right? So there can be reactivations of infections, and we can talk about that later on. There's a lot of co-infections and other stuff, viral infections that we can talk about. But really, just think about mold as decreasing your immune system's function, if you will, or ability to fight off invaders. That can be huge, right? So
Can
yeah.
it affect our hormones as
For sure,
well?
yes. By all means, I get this with a lot of female clients is mold toxicity, boy, heavy metals, mold toxicity, radiation, chemicals. Those are the big, chemicals at the top that can impact hormones. Especially for females, men too, right? But usually, females are more proactive about it, or they're more symptomatic with it, where it can actually cause a lot of hormonal issues, right? Not
Mhm.
just the female hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and all that, but actually thyroid hormone. I have quite a few clients that actually mold toxicity was a big impetus or causation of their Hashimoto's hypothyroid, right? So it's a
Wow.
pretty nasty thing, right? And I'm glad we're talking about it. We could
Yeah,
talk a few hours about it, right? So let's keep
I
going. But
know.
we'll have to do maybe a
Yeah.
part two mold, right? How about that?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's a
It's a big
huge,
subject.
yeah, it's a huge subject that
Yeah.
that really is impacting people more so. And really, I'll kind of go on a rabbit hole. I just thought of something where, the experts are talking about how 5G and EMF actually and mold plays a big role in why it's maybe presenting more so, right?
Hmm.
Because EMF can actually irritate and make mold worse, if you will, right? Dr. Klinghardt, medical doctor, PhD, he talks about how the presence of EMF in a moldy environment, mold inside your body, mold in your home, can actually make the mycotoxins or mold more pathogenic, and affect people more so, right? Um,
Maybe explain EMFs for those
yeah,
that don't
EMFs,
really know.
electromagnetic fields, right? So from your Wi-Fi router, your Bluetooth, right? So it's the invisible, forces that we're getting from these
all the time.
electronic sources, right? You know, your modems,
Yeah.
your cell phone towers, right? And Klinghardt actually talks about how EMF can be that to mold, if you will. It can be that little kid that's saying, "Hey, mommy, hey, mommy, hey, mommy," like all day long, you know, nonstop for days, weeks, months, right? And it makes it worse, right? So that's why a lot of experts are thinking that mold toxicity is becoming so much more prevalent, is the presence of more and
Yeah.
more, you know, cell phone towers, you know, maybe more, you know, severe 5G stuff, you know, all that kind of stuff can make
Kind
it
of
more
poking at the
toxic.
beast
Yeah,
a little bit,
poking the beast, right?
poking
Yeah,
the beast.
poking the
Yeah.
bear a little bit too much, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so little side note on that I just thought of, and that's huge, right?
Yeah. Are there ways for people to test if they have mold exposure, both in their home and in their bodies?
Yeah, great question. Great question. I get this a lot too. And what's really cool is there's actually some pretty decent testing for mold and mycotoxins for your environment. That's where I like to start first. Boy, let's find out if you're getting hit in your environment. Let's get rid of it. Let's figure it out. Let's find it. You know, maybe not in that order, but let's find it first. Let's get rid of it. And then there's also ways to test for your body, what I call body burden, meaning what the mold that's inside your body. Because believe it or not, mold you've been exposed to, if you were, when you're, say you're 5 years old and you lived in a really moldy home, you can actually carry those mold spores in your body with replication of parasites, and it can live in your gut, can actually colonize in your gut. So you can have that body burden of mold, if you will, throughout your whole life, right? So boy, with mold, you got to, you know, make sure that you're not getting acutely exposed in your living environment, right? But then also test your body if you can. If people can afford the testing for that, I really do like to go that route, because we can get a baseline, we can see what's affecting you internally, and then we can watch that, you know, go down over time with extra testing. And on the call, we were actually talking about this. So it's interesting. I've heard this from, you know, Dr. Klinghardt, some experts in the field, where molds, a lot of mold and Lyme usually go hand in hand. Here's why: because someone moves into a moldy home, right? The mold actually decreases their immune system, and if there's dormant Lyme or Lyme present, we can talk about Lyme disease in the future. I know a lot of people are like, what, Lyme? That sounds crazy, but a
Which is
lot,
actually really common
yeah, a lot
from
more,
what you've
yeah,
told me.
more prevalent than
Yeah.
breast cancer now, right? Lyme disease
Wow.
is really prevalent, right? We can talk about Lyme, don't be scared, but mold can actually decrease your body's ability to fight off that, you know, disease, you know, infections, if you will, whether it be viral or Lyme disease. And people that have been able to fight off Lyme disease for a while with strong immune system, keep it at bay, all of a sudden it can, you know, rear its ugly head and, you know, cause issues for that, for the people, right? So for that person.
Hmm.
Back to testing. So some great environmental tests that we can do. All right, there's a couple I like to do if we're strongly suspicious of mold in the environment. I like people to do. There's a little petri dish test. It's from Immunolytics. It's a great company. You just put you put a dish in each, two or three rooms that you spend the most time in your home. Just let it sit out for an hour, send that in, get it tested. That's a great way to test your environment. If we're strongly suspicious, I like people to do both of these tests, the petri dish plus what's called an ERMI test, right? It stands for Environmental Mold Index test. And what that is, don't dust your home for a few weeks, right? And you get like this Swiffer cloth and you kind of dust a little bit on all the furniture and all the rooms in your home. Send that in. They actually do some DNA testing for all this species of mold, right? And this can be pretty accurate. There are some companies that will come in and do all this for you, plus some extra fancy tests that can add up and be pretty expensive. But if people want to do some things on their own to save some money, this is really the way to go, right? The Petri dish test is about $33 per room. The ERMI test ranges anywhere from $200 to $300, right? So, but between those tests, you can get a really good idea if you do, have a mold exposure in your home, right? And then
Worth it
as
to know.
yeah, worth it to know for sure. And then if you
Yeah.
if you want to test your body, which I really do prefer people do if they can, it's a first morning urine void test. It's just a functional medicine test kit that they have at home. They can do in the comfort of their own home. And this can test for your body burden of mold or mycotoxins in your body, and that can be a phenomenal test and really give us some more clues on what you're dealing with internally, right? So
Okay.
that's the testing for that. I use Great Plains laboratories for that, or Vibrant Labs. They have some really good mycotoxin testing for sure, right? So
Okay. So if somebody doesn't do anything, doesn't take any measures to get rid of the mold inside of their system, will it go away on its own?
Great question. Great question. So mold is definitely one of those things like parasites. Boy, you got to tackle it. You got to tackle it correctly. It is possible, I guess, someone does. Boy, the biggest thing is if you have mold exposure in your living environment or wherever it may be, boy, get out and get into a safe place. That's number one, right? And then number two, yeah, work with somebody to get rid of it. But I would say, hypothetically, if someone got into a clean environment, they might be able to stumble along and be okay, but not feel optimal. I mean, I guess that's possible, right? But obviously I deal with people that are dealing with a condition or have chronic illness, or they just have they just don't feel good. They're not healthy, right? So to be honest, to clear that out is really important, right? So A, get them in a clean, safe environment. B, then you start working on it. And just like I mentioned, you can have that body burden of mold toxicity, from being a kid all the way through being an adult. Parasites contain the mold spores, right? They can gobble up a bunch of mycotoxins to take that initial hit off your body. But then the mold toxin is inside you. The parasites go through the life cycle, they spew out the mold, more parasites eat it up, right? So really, to be honest, people are going to have a body burden unless they actively, go after that body burden of mold toxicity. Yeah, how do you get rid of it, right? So
Yeah.
that's the whole thing, right? So we talked about, boy, parasites plays a whole role. We talked about drainage, preparing the body for parasites last time. And really that's the protocol for getting rid of mold is good old drainage, 1 to 3 months in some people. There's a certain protocol, there's certain, you got to follow the steps, right? You got to do the drainage. You have to address parasites, at least a little bit first, to a certain degree. So knock down those parasites,
I
and then
have
you
to get
start
that
going after the
drainage
mold.
funnel from you.
Yeah, drainage funnel. Let's talk about that. Let's put
Yeah.
that up next time. Let's talk about that,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, drainage, address the gut, potential parasites, and then you can actively start going after mold. Really the best thing you can do with mold, like I said, get in a clean environment. Mold actually colonizes and starts growing in the sinuses. People that are actively dealing with mold or body burden of mold, boy, have them start doing some sinus rinses every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day in really bad cases, right? But at first saline rinses, and there's other things we can use in there, some antifungals, some antiparasitic herbs, believe it or not, in liquid form can be a really great approach to start cleaning out the sinuses, right? So we have people actively clean out their sinuses, get in a clean environment first, clean out sinuses, do the drainage, do the parasites. I know this sounds complicated, right? So important to work with
Mhm.
somebody, right?
Yeah.
If
Yep.
it's not me or
Always.
whatever, but work with somebody who knows what they're doing. And then there's some great protocols that we can use to get rid of the mold out of the body, right? Using antifungals, using glutathione, using specific binders that grab onto the mold itself. There's a few companies that have some amazing binders that kind of grab onto the mold, escort it out of the body, which is super important. All the while making sure you're going number 2, 3 times a day, supporting the liver, gallbladder, supporting your lymph flow. It's all connected to that drainage funnel. We should bring that up next time, right? But yeah, and that's the good news. There's ways to treat it, get it out of the body. And once you do the prep work, right? Do the prep work like, painting a room, you got to do the taping, you got to do the scraping, you got to prep it. That's the drainage, the parasites, the gut. And then once you do all that properly, you can actually start getting rid of mold pretty quickly with the right protocols.
So if somebody is exposed in their environment to mold, are there ways that they can safely eliminate that mold? Are there things that maybe they shouldn't do that we've been taught to do to
Yep.
eliminate mold that can make it
Yeah.
worse? Some do's
Great.
and don'ts.
Great question. Great question. Right. So really, number one, right? Don't try to get rid of mold with bleach. This is the biggest question I get with clients, right? A lot of people are like, they see mold in the shower or wherever it may be in the house. They get out the bleach and they wipe it down. So bleach is actually water-based, and that can actually feed the mold and make it worse, right? There's products out there that are, hydrogen peroxide based, and we can put some links in the show notes here. There's some companies that I do
Yeah.
like to use, right?
Okay.
EC3 is a good one. Um, there's some great stuff. And that's another thing too. Boy, mold will get into porous objects like a blanket, carpet. People can actually move out of a moldy home and take the mold spores with them to the new home, right? So it's really better a lot of times just to dump all that stuff, keep the non-porous stuff like, marble tables and, all that kind of, you can keep that,
Right.
but get rid of the clothes and the blankets and the carpets and stuff as much as possible, the rugs. There are some some detergents that you can use to, potentially kill off the mold spores. Those can be successful with some people, sometimes not, but really is best start with a clean slate as much as possible. And then get into the place. And then there are some services. So Pure Maintenance is a company that I've used recently. It's basically hydrogen peroxide and acetic acid. So basically vinegar and hydrogen peroxide they use in a certain powerful mixture where they can actually fog your home, right? So I've had a client where they actually did this at first because the mold toxicity was so bad in her home. They actually did a Pure Maintenance mold fogging, right? Just to kind of knock down the pathogenic load. And then they went in and did there was a couple rooms that actually needed to be, cut out, replaced, and fixed, if you will, right?
Yeah.
That's important. If there's a leak, you need to find it. You need to replace the drywall. Today's drywall, boy, just add water and it's the perfect, food for mold, right? So this is where it gets tricky. And a lot of people don't want to hear this because it can be a little expensive, right? Or a lot
It's a
expensive
big
for
thing to
some people.
tackle.
But yeah, it's an important thing to tackle because boy, this is
Yeah.
your health, right? And this is your house,
Right.
right? So it's
Right.
tough.
Where
It's
you
a
spend most of your time.
yeah, it's a
It's
dual-edged
one of the
sword.
places.
Yeah, people want to hear about it, but they don't. And I get it, but there are some lower costs. And that's what I like about Pure Maintenance. A lot of times people can spray their home for, fraction of the price of the full remediation. And sometimes that
Right.
can do the trick potentially, unless there is a few structural things that need to be changed, right? But a lot of times Pure Maintenance will come in and they'll knock down the mold, pathogenic load. And then the remediation will happen, say it's a room or two or just one, and then they'll come back in and fog things again to kind of bring it down after all the remediation's done. So that's just a potential option, right? But yeah, there's good news is there's light at the end of the tunnel. There's ways to help people, with mold, whether it be in their environment, in their body. Usually it's both, right? There's ways to get rid of it, right? So yeah, definitely don't use bleach, right? There's some great people to follow. We can put in your show notes. Mold Finders on Instagram is a good one. He talks about bleach and the cleaning stuff. So it's not just me saying this. It's people that are experts in this field. I can send you those links and you can put them on your
Okay.
YouTube video. Melody, I think that would be a good idea. Right.
Okay. Yeah,
Right.
I've heard
So
that from a couple of different people
yeah,
not to use bleach, which is so like I dealt with mold in my
sure.
apartment
Yep.
for like 8 years, and that's
Yeah,
all I used was bleach. And so
you bet. Yep.
to recognize that I was actually feeding the
Making it worse.
problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
to follow you that you just think intuitively it's going to kill it, and
Right.
a lot of people do
Yep.
it. So don't feel bad.
Yep.
Right. So
Yep.
yeah. And looking back on your case, boy, mold was a big part
Huge.
of your, not feeling good, being unhealthy, if you will.
Yeah.
A big part of your health, what I should say,
Struggle.
struggle.
Well,
Yeah, was
yeah.
mold, right?
Something to tackle.
Yeah, and we had to dig in deep and get that out of your body, and it just
Well,
makes such a huge difference. It can really change people's lives when you get them in a clean environment, and then you get it out of your body. It can lift that blanket up. Your immune system can actually start functioning. You can start
yeah.
digesting better.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can take some time, as you know, right? So it takes
Yeah.
a couple years, and to be honest, I think you're going to improve even more in the next 1 to 2 years. To be honest, right? To
Yeah.
to
I
feel
like that prediction.
even better, right? So
I
anyway,
like it.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Got to take
Um,
the burden off the body.
yeah,
And
for sure, right?
yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
it's super rewarding when you can tackle this. Mold can also cause weird neurological stuff with people, right? Just have another client right now. He's had some very strange vertigo stuff, neurological, skin rashes, and it just, sure enough, we just tested him off the charts on a couple of the mycotoxins on the urine testing, right? And we did the oat test as an organic acid test, where the first page you can actually see if mold is colonizing in your gut, and sure enough, those were lit up like a Christmas tree as well with a certain individual. So it's kind of nice. We have some answers. Obviously we have some work to do, right? With this client, but it really gives us some answers and it shows us, what is really potentially causing, neurological issues that he's experiencing, right? So anyway, little side note
I
from
I
a client
imagine just like with parasites, they get misdiagnosed so much.
for sure.
I
Yeah,
imagine the same is with mold as well,
for
mold
sure.
toxicity.
You bet.
Yeah.
You bet. Mold can be it's called the great mimicker, it can seem like a lot of different things, right? But yeah, and another thing too, and I just thought of this too, another symptom of mold is sometimes people take something and it has the opposite effect that it's supposed to have. Like, so say they take a supplement that's supposed to support their brain or help their liver or feel better, it can actually have the exact opposite effect and make people feel
Oh,
worse. So that's a, yeah, extra little bonus, tidbit I just thought
okay.
of, right?
All right. Nice.
Anyway, so
I'll
yeah,
take it.
so yeah, great subject. Boy, we could probably do a part two on this subject, right? But
Yeah, yeah.
it's good to know though. There's some answers out there, and boy, yeah, to be honest, I would say a good 70 to 80% of my clients, mold is a part of their issues. I mean, maybe a small part, maybe a big part, but it's usually part of the puzzle that we have to address, right? To get
Yeah.
them, better, or get them to optimal health, right? So anyway,
Like you mentioned, these topics can be really scary to
mhm,
people. Parasites, mold, heavy
mhm,
metals, all of it can be kind of scary. But
sure,
in my mind, the scarier thing is not addressing them and allowing them to stay. And so I
for sure.
know like it feels really important to get this message out to people that even though it's a scary thing to face, like your
Mhm.
health is worth
It is. Yep.
investing in and
Yep.
taking care of.
You
So
bet. You bet.
yeah,
Exactly. Exactly. Right.
yeah.
So, yeah, I've heard from just one more point too. I've heard from, there's a medical doctor that works with Cellcore. She actually did a presentation on mold and mycotoxins. She actually had, I'll have to dig up the data. She actually had some really good references that actually talked about how mold and mycotoxin exposure can actually lead to potential certain types of cancers, right? So this is no joke, right? This is a huge issue. And you think
Yeah.
about it, if it decreases your immune system can't
Yeah.
function normally, then it could potentially lead to, cancer, right? Obviously
Yeah.
other infections, but, and then cancer itself. That's pretty scary, right?
Well, and that makes me think of our cellular health because
Yep,
that's, I mean, cancer is based off of our cellular health.
for sure.
So that
Yep.
would be a topic in itself for us to address it somewhere
You
down
bet.
the road.
Yeah,
Like,
you bet.
yeah,
You bet. So,
yeah,
but good. Yeah, great topic. Maybe we could dig
yeah,
up enough information to do part two. Maybe not, but
yeah.
we'll see how your people like this, right? So,
Yeah.
but yeah, great,
Well,
great
I
stuff.
liked it.
Good,
So
good. Yeah, so did I. I love it. Good stuff.
very good. Oh, well, thank you once again,
Yeah,
Brandon, for sitting down and talking to us about a really important subject. Is there anything that you wanted to add before we close
I think
or?
that's it for now. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, thanks for having me on again, and hopefully
Yeah.
your people your following enjoys this information, and yeah,
Yeah.
we'll go from there,
Sounds
right? So awesome.
okay.
Very
Sounds
good.
good. All
Have
right.
a great day. We'll talk to
You
you.
too.
See you,
Bye,
Melody.
Brandon.
Bye-bye. Ooh. Habada shabada. Okay.
Oh, how about
Yeah.
a shabada?
Habada shabada. Be like Steve Carell or like, what was his name? Will Ferrell.
I love Sue Carell.